So yeah, my name is Tammy Jabarin. I developed, I guess it's kind of like just a workshop, even though it's kind of its infancy stages yet, where we look at the hero's journey as a way for self-exploration, self-discovery. And of course, it kind of happened during the quarantine, like many of us kind of discovered new things about ourselves and worked on new ideas. And so yeah, I'm a social worker. My background, I have a very extensive background in trauma. One of the beautiful things about working with the city of Philadelphia was I was able to take an additional 300 plus hours of continuing ed through the family professional program. And it was really focused on trauma, working with clients with trauma, which fit very well with the clientele that I was working with. And I was able to receive a certificate to teach trauma awareness. So while I was thinking about how to do that, like what I would do, how would I approach uh, and teach the concept of trauma, because every one of us has been impacted at some point in our lives, and we all react differently to trauma. But a lot of us, because of survival, because of life, because of multiple reasons, we kind of work through it, and somehow we get through things. But then there's always that one thing that can happen that can kind of start a cataclysm spiral, and next thing we know, we're stuck. And so I did some prayer about it. And I was actually visiting a friend. We were on our way to a doTERRA conference in Salt Lake City. And I was thinking of, okay, as a social worker, one of the best ways to connect with a client is through storytelling, so that they open up and they share their story. So what would be a good story? And I prayed about it, and then I saw The Wizard of Oz kind of play out in my mind, like sequence after sequence. But what I hadn't realized, and I wonder if anybody's ever picked up on it, is that you don't realize the childhood trauma that Dorothy had gone through that wound up making her live with her aunt and uncle in the first place. That's never brought up in the story, but it must have been pretty significant for her not to be with her parents. And in the very beginning of the story, you see her being triggered because no one's listening to her when her dog's being threatened. No one's offering help. And so that pain comes out, and she sings the song Over the Rainbow. So that's kind of one of the reasons why I wanted to start, because it takes that trigger for us to kind of recognize that we have a need that's it's not met. And so when I watched the movie, I wrote down all these major points, and it wasn't until a couple of years later that I came across Joseph Campbell's book. I was in the library, and I was just walking down an aisle, and I saw The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And I'm like, oh, that looks interesting. And then here's this man who discovered the whole template. It was wonderful. So it was so easy to plug the Wizard of Oz story into that. Now, like Linda was saying, I am a massage therapist as well, and I studied with Dr. Eric Pearl, and I'm a reconnective energy worker. So all these aspects come together when addressing this, when I developed this program, and I'll explain that later. But yeah, so Joseph Campbell was so fascinating. He was born in 1904. He was a professor of comparative religion and mythology, and during his studies, he discovered what he calls the monomyth, which is basically this one template that's in pretty much all stories throughout the world, no matter what culture that he studied with. So he calls the monomyth basically a mirror for the ego, and he describes how this applies to all humanity. And so when I took his work and I took the stages and I compared it to The Wizard of Oz, it was just so beautiful. It was so easily laid out. So I thought this is a great way to build a workshop around this for people to kind of explore their own lives through Dorothy's journey, based upon these stages. So I'm just going to go over the stages real quick. I'm sure some of you might be familiar with Joseph Campbell. So the first stage would be call to adventure. Okay, so the hero hears there's something that comes up, that makes him know that, or her know that it's time for a change, like it's time to start something new. And so they cross that threshold in doing so. And they meet a mentor, someone who kind of is willing to guide them through the journey, whether it be there physically or just coming in when needed. Um, and they also, along that time, start to develop allies, and they start to develop an enemy. Um, then they have a leap of faith. So something changes within them that causes them to really press forward and to be willing to take on the journey. And along that journey, they have a road of trials. So they come across different obstacles that helps them to kind of shape who they are, kind of bring out their best qualities, and sometimes not the best qualities to be worked on. And then they hit the ordeal, like the massive moment where they're really tested. And through that test, they reach a sixth stage of transformation, where they're not the same person they were when they started that journey. And all those better qualities have come forward and really rooted in them. And they're given an endowment, like there's something, there's some type of gift that is not meant just for them, not just for them accomplishing that journey, but also for them to share with their greater community. So that becomes their life mastery, which is the eighth step, which is returning to home, returning to bring that gift for others to experience. So those are kind of like an idea of Joseph Campbell's different stages. And when I look at The Wizard of Oz, and I'm going to go over that real quick. It really plays in well. So for a journey checklist, it's kind of like a self-discovery map. If you know the stages, you can look at your own life and maybe even write in those moments where that can, where you fit into that journey. And some people might be in the midst of it. They might be stuck at a certain stage of it, but it does provide a really good self-discovery map. It gives you the itinerary of what to look for. So if you know you're on one stage and you want to get to the next stage, it's really easy to be able to kind of put together, well, what are the tools that I have? What is the gift I've been given so that I can do this journey and get to that next place? What is the goal? One of the things that Joseph Campbell says is the hero really needs to know thyself, like the moral compass. What are my values? Because those values are what attracts your allies with you. That's what brings you that cohesiveness. And those who don't meet those values tend to become that enemy that you're kind of like up against during that journey. Another thing is grading personal guides, which are your allies and your mentor, those people that come in because there's no such thing as doing the journey alone. We don't have a clear definition of that journey or who we are, what our strengths are without those allies and guides. And then, of course, understanding purpose. Without purpose, you wouldn't have started that journey to begin with. So kind of getting a clarity about what that purpose is sometimes happens while we're on the journey. We might have an idea, but we don't really understand until we get closer to that endowment stage. And then embracing passion, because nobody can do a journey without crossing the threshold. Nobody can do it without embracing their passion. And sometimes we also need the journey to help us define that more clearly. So I wanted to plug in a little thing that I saw. One of Picasso's quotes is, the meaning of life is to find your gift. The purpose of life is to give it away. And that is the end stage of that hero's journey, is that life mastery, that gift that you share with others because of what you've learned. So the three stages of that inner journey is really about, number one, awareness. That's the biggest piece. Without awareness, we have no clue on what we're facing. Embracing the change, being willing to walk into the process of change so that we can come out the other end in renewal, which is that final stage of being transformed. So when I looked at the Wizard of Oz story, it was so fascinating because, again, I hadn't realized that there was such a huge trauma that's never discussed in the story. So now we can kind of see, when we reflect on that, like what might have propelled Dorothy to try to save Toto, to start her journey to begin with, because that's why she did that. She ran away to try to save her dog. And it's through understanding the love of another, which she finds out that when she meets the soothsayer, who is a guide, who basically tells her your aunt's dying because you ran away. And she runs back home, and she even runs into the house in the midst of a tornado to try to find her aunt and let her aunt know, I'm okay, you know. So that's the love of another that kind of caused her to cross the threshold and put herself into a situation where the journey literally begins. The house gets lifted by the tornado, and she's carried off to Oz, where she basically kills the first witch, which is that apathy of, we won't do anything sometimes in life, but if a loved one's in danger, we do, and we propel ourselves forward. And once we overcome that apathy, she kills that first evil, which is the bad witch, and she meets the good witch, who becomes her mentor, who tells her, here's the journey, the yellow brick road leads you to Oz. So that's her beginning of her journey. On that journey, she meets her allies. She meets the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion, who are aspects of her mind, aspects of her heart, and aspects of her will, which are the three aspects that we all share as humans: our mind, our heart, and our will. And they all feel there's a lack. And so they join the journey with her to get the gifts from the wizard that will help them make up for that lack. And of course, she meets her enemy, which is the second witch, the bad witch, who tries to impede her journey. She gets to the ordeal. So the ordeal, I feel we all struggle with ordeals. And one of the things that she comes across, so I want to take the shortcut through the poppy field to get to the great place. So she walks through the poppy field, and who falls asleep? Her and her willpower, the lion. And it's only her heart and her mind that call out for the mentor to come back and help revive her to continue her journey. And I'm sure we all have a poppy field that we've been stuck in at some point, where we kind of fall asleep and we forget our journey. We forget to, and it takes that guide, that person to come in and kind of help us, whether that be God, whether that be a loved one, someone that comes in and kind of holds our hand and gets us back onto the journey. So through that, she goes into Oz, and she finds out, you need to conquer this other evil. You need to go out and get the other witch. And she does that in order for her and for everybody with her to gain their gifts. And she does conquer that witch, which is love of self, because it's through wanting to save the Scarecrow that she throws the water and destroys the second witch. So she does an action to save herself out of love, self-love. And that's the transformation. She comes back to Oz, to the wizard, and finds out it's just an illusion. He's an illusion. It's all within her. All the gifts, everybody already had that. Her mind, her heart, and her will. They just needed acknowledgement. They're given the acknowledgement. But her biggest gift was realizing she had the gift to get home the entire time. She didn't need to rely on anybody to do that. She just had to go through the journey to get to that level of understanding. And when she goes home, she recognizes that the family that she lives with, they love her, she loves them, and the joy of that love and that community is what she brings back with her, knowing herself much better than before she left. That appreciation of her loved ones that she didn't maybe feel that she totally understood before she began her journey. So that's kind of the Dorothy story. And I'm sure that when we reflect on that, we can think of moments in our own life where we might have been in very significant stages of that hero's journey. So that's kind of one of the reasons why I loved it, because it does help people understand, like, even if you've had a significant trauma, you can still start your journey, and that trauma could be the gift that helps you cross that threshold to begin your journey. So that's kind of that part. And one of the things we talked about when setting up the talk today was to look at Martin Luther King, since it's his birthday. And in America, you couldn't get one of our greatest heroes, right, is Martin Luther King. And you couldn't get a more wonderful representation of that hero's journey than his own journey and the gift that he brought us, this, our community, our collective community, which was understanding segregation and understanding its negativity and how important it is to work together and to respect one another. So when I looked at his hero's journey, basically he sees it as a problem. He crosses a threshold. He leaves his home to begin his work to teach people about the negative impacts of segregation. And Rosa Parks is his mentor. She comes to his home. She encourages him to begin that journey, helps him kind of see how it's going to play out. He gives a speech that kind of kickstarts everything, and he crosses the threshold, begins his campaign. His trials, well, he was able to start the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He was able to develop allies, but unfortunately, along the way, those who opposed his ideals were the enemies that were developing that unfortunately put him in jail several times, and he was imprisoned several times during those trials and journeys. But he achieved his goals with his dream. I have a dream speech in 1963, and it was a transformative speech for the entire world, whether it was affected that moment or if it's affected us decades later. And what was really beautiful is his transformation, his gift was meeting Gandhi. Gandhi was in the Washington that day, and he approached King and he said, "I'm so proud of you. You've done this, not embracing violence, like teaching that goals can be met without violence." And that was a huge gift that I think he received that day, hearing his mentor, Gandhi, come to him and tell him that. And his return home, we know how he returned home, unfortunately. He was martyred, yet in his martyrdom, he left a legacy that cannot be ignored and has continued to grow and build over the decades. And so that's his hero journey in a nutshell, very abbreviated, but I wanted to share that because it's so important that, I mean, he started out as a preacher. He started out as just a regular guy who saw that something needed to change, and he felt the call. He crossed the threshold, and he didn't back down. And with that, even at the end of his personal journey, he was able to help others start theirs. And I was listening to NPR yesterday, and they were talking about a rabbi who worked with him. I forget, I know his first name is Israel. I can't remember his last name now. He recently passed away at 92, but he was on the journey with King, and he was from our area. And he talked in an interview a while back about how much King's journey propelled him forward to work for the rights of all people. So it was really beautiful, and it brought people from different backgrounds together, and that was a huge gift that he shared with us on his personal journey. So I wanted to, I think that's about 20 minutes. Is that correct? Okay. I didn't have a clock in front of me, so I was just taking my chance with that one. But I'm open to questions. I would like to see what your reflections are on what I shared. And if you have any questions about, I did develop a workshop. I've done 2 runs of it. I am a member of Burn Athens Church. So while we're in quarantine, some of the ladies from church, some friends of mine, I kind of just said, "Hey ladies, can I try this out? Can we explore this?" And we did a whole 10 weeks of exploring the different stages, which was really neat. We were all in tears and we had all these reflections, but it really brought us closer. And then I kind of put it together a little bit more structurally and presented it with the Being One Center last year. And a few people had joined in and we did a round of it. So yeah, so I'm just kind of still developing and getting some of the rough spots out, but I'm curious to hear anybody's reflections on that.